Hey everyone, it's Irene from Bay Wellness Coaching. I'm super excited today to be interviewing Laura about her personal experience growing up as a Vietnamese-American woman in the San Francisco Bay Area. We'll be chatting about her experience growing up in the Bay, her journey through tech, and now as a Master's of Social Work candidate at Columbia University. So thanks again, Laura, for being on the show. Do you think you could share a little bit more about your experience growing up here in San Jose?
Thank you so much for having me, Irene. My experience growing up here in the Bay Area, as you mentioned, I grew up in San Jose, which was a very large Vietnamese community area. So I was really fortunate to have a lot of my culture be expressed in my day-to-day life, in the sense of, like, my peers at school, a lot of them were also Vietnamese-American. I had like Vietnamese grocery stores and like Vietnamese doctors, and I felt like I was really able to live in a bilingual world where my Vietnamese side was cherished and embraced just as much as my American side. And so even though I was born here in the US, my parents are actually Vietnamese refugees that moved over after the Vietnam War, or during the Vietnam War. And I think growing up with refugee parents has been a really interesting experience, to say the least. I think there's a lot of like just intergenerational trauma and a lot of fear and anxiety that comes from having really traumatic experiences that they had gone through. And I think it really does manifest in the way that I was raised. I think my household was very much so about like, it was very strict in a sense, and I think like a lot of Asian households, we didn't really talk about emotions very much, and it wasn't very common to express emotions unless they were negative emotions. So we expressed negative emotions, but positive emotions like joy, intimacy were something that needed to be kind of like kept under wraps. And I think my parents really believed that this was a way to instill strength in us, and to like build like resilient children in my sister and I. But I think it also really dictates the way that I think about my career and the way that I think about success and the way that I think about achievement coming from that background. So we didn't grow up with very much. And so education was basically like my ticket to a different lifestyle. I grew up living in a mobile home park, and we didn't have a lot, but we had each other, we had community, and we had education. And coming from that, I went to a Title I school, Independence High. When I was there, we had barbed wire fencing all around the school, and we had police officers that were stationed at the school. And there was a lot of like gang violence, and it was really tough. I really wanted a different life for myself, and I really wanted a different life for my future family and with everything that my parents had sacrificed to be where they were, and even allow me to be in the Bay Area. And so from there, I ended up, just kind of thinking about what's next and like wanting to do something different. And that's kind of like how my upbringing has really influenced me.
Yeah, sounds like a very challenging way to grow up. And I'm amazed and happy to hear that so many things have changed since then. So do you think maybe you could share a little bit more about kind of school and how that kind of impacted your journey, like kind of maybe between high school and college, like what transitions happened there?
Absolutely. So I graduated high school, and my mom really wanted me to go to community college. to save money, because we really couldn't afford to go to, a 4-year. And I was really fortunate that I actually was able to get a full ride scholarship to UC Berkeley. And so I was the first person in my family to go to a university. And this was just like, it was huge, and it was hard. Like, I will say that transitionary time is probably the hardest time I've had in my adult life, in the sense that I had come from this Title I school where academic achievement, wasn't as important and wasn't as valued, and then coming to a college that was super like,
academic. Yeah.
just very academic, very
Yeah.
very challenging. Yes. And I didn't do very well at all when I first transitioned. And I felt so much imposter syndrome, because I had gotten all this messaging growing up, like, oh, you should just go to community college. Like, our school doesn't really prepare kids for college very well. And like, just go to community college, and I decided to take that risk. And it really broke my heart at first that I wasn't cutting it. I was, I think I got like some C's. I think I got 1 D that very first semester, and I was a straight A student before that. And I wanted to highlight that piece in this, because I think a lot of folks get very discouraged when they are the first in their family to go to a 4-year, and they find it really challenging, and they're like, I don't fit in here, my people aren't here, and so to struggle then and be able to do better over time. And like, I eventually got used to the caliber of work, and my grades picked up. I ended up, by the time I graduated, I think my last semester I had a 4.0. And it really goes to show that, like, it's even if you start maybe not at the same place as your other classmates, it doesn't mean you can't catch up. So that was like a really huge thing for me in that transitionary time, working through that imposter syndrome, learning how to have work at a different caliber, and how to like talk to my parents about this, because I think they were feeling very much so like, we told you so, like, things aren't going well, you should come home. And after my first year, my mom really pressured me to quit. And she was like, you should come home, you're not doing well, and I'm glad that I stuck it through, but it really did cause a rift in like my relationship, with her. And I think ultimately what's important as an Asian American is for me at least, was to like forge my own path. And I think my parents were very much so like, they had a very strong idea as to like, this is what your path should look like. And I decided that I wanted it to look a little bit different. And building that self-confidence in myself really, really blossomed me, I think, from those early days to like midway into my academic career.
Yeah, and I think Asian American people have such diverse experiences. Like, my parents also came here with like nothing, but they were more on the track of like, education is your way of succeeding in the US. Like, you have to do well in school and you have to go to a good school. And I also agree, like, my first semester at UC Berkeley was very, very difficult as well. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, this is like this people with the best grades from every single school then go to this other place where now you're competing with everyone else with like the best scores from their different schools. And you're like, what? This is so difficult. And like, I think a lot of people don't always realize that. And like, college is a difficult time. You're meeting so many new people. You might be living in a different city than you used to be living in. You might even be moving to a different state. Like, it is difficult. And I'm glad like you highlighted how you had challenges, but you're able to overcome that. And even the diversity within the Asian community. Like, so like you could come from Asian immigrant parents who are like obsessed with you going to school, and like, you have to get into the school because it's local. And they're like, you have to go here because it's local. It's going to be less expensive for us paying in-state tuition. Like, they were just like, you have to go to like a nearby UC. There was like no discussion in that regard. So it's kind of interesting to hear, even within the Bay Area, like how diverse like your Asian American experience can be, whether like your parents are supportive and trying to encourage you and like not necessarily force, but so strongly encourage you to like, you must go to like UC Berkeley. This is the school that like we dream for you to go to. So
Yeah.
that's very interesting to hear. Um,
I mean, it really is, and like, especially because like my parents also were very much about education, like education being the ticket, but they also felt like, I mean, I think just discouraged by their experiences of trying to make it here and trying to be successful here, where they're like, you're just not going to make it, like we're worried that you're not even going to be able to graduate. So you need to like, go to community college so that you can build yourself up to be able to transfer to a 4-year, and ultimately like continue on with your education. But it's interesting to think of like the hurdles that they have had to come through to feel so discouraged that their child probably wouldn't be able to do college.
Well, that's amazing. You end up graduating, doing well in school, and I guess transitioning a little bit more about kind of your career journey. Like, what was your first job like, and how did you get that? So whether it's like your job in high school and then maybe your future jobs, like in terms of more career focused full-time work.
Yeah, so I have been working like my whole life. My first job was when I was 16 years old. I worked in retail for a while, and then all throughout college, I also worked in a variety of jobs, like as an office assistant. I worked as a salesperson in a smoke shop. I worked in all kinds of different, odds and ends to like pay for my expenses through school and stuff like that. And at the same time, I was volunteering. And the volunteer work is what I started getting more and more passionate about. So at the time, my undergrad was in psychology. And so I was doing a lot of volunteer work, one with a sleep clinic. And I really liked that clinic because it took a very medical approach, but the treatment was behavioral. And so it had like the rigor of a medical study while having a treatment that I felt was really therapeutic in like behavioral coaching, and like this especially geared toward youth with troubled backgrounds that deal with substance issues. And so trying to like not medicate them more for their sleep issues, but like try to get to some of those deeper reasons why youth might be struggling with insomnia. And doing that work, and I think that was probably my first real job, even though it was a volunteer job. That was my first real job where I felt like the work that I was doing was really impactful, that I was changing lives, I was making a difference. And that really has empowered me throughout my career, is that drive to want to create impact and want to really, support others in their own journey. And so after doing that, I graduated and I started looking for jobs in either in research or in mental health. But with my undergrad in psychology, it was really hard for me to find work in that specific field without any sort of like master's training. And so I didn't know what to do, because I felt like I had this path, and I decided, since I don't know what to do, I'm not going to invest in anything. I want to just invest in myself and my skills versus like investing in a specific career line. So I figured I'm going to just learn new skills. So I took one of those like tech boot camp, like coding boot camps where you learn a new language. I had taken some coding classes in college, but I had nothing, not nearly enough to like get a job in it. So I took this boot camp and I ended up getting a job as a junior engineer. It was kind of a terrible job. It was at like this really small startup. I was making $50K a year as an engineer. And I wasn't very happy, but I did learn so much there as well, because I got to learn like how to work in smaller, fast-paced types of organizations. And that ended up bringing me to Google. After I worked at that startup for a while, I realized engineering, one, is probably not for me. And two, that I did enjoy tech, but I didn't know where I fit into tech if it wasn't as an engineer. So I basically like applied cold to Google. I knew someone that worked there, but not in a department that I was interested in. And so she like, told me a little bit more about like general roles at Google, and I ended up finding something that really fit well with me. And I stayed in that role for like almost 4 years as an account manager working in ads. And I really enjoyed it. It was an amazing experience, but I kept going back to that drive, those from that first job. And I just knew like I needed to do more social impact work. So I started volunteering more at Google and doing volunteer work on like how do we build up younger employees that are marginalized, how do we bring in like the community and like support our local community in that area as well. And so I ended up like running various like events, building out training programs especially for women of color to advance their careers at Google. And it just wasn't enough. It's like I was like doing 2 jobs. I was like moonlighting this job I was so passionate about, and then I had a day job where I was in ad sales. And it just came to a head where I realized I was really unhappy, and I was ready to do what I'd always planned to do, because I knew that tech was never going to be my final career. And I'm like, I'm ready. I built the skills I wanted to build. I know account management. I know some technical work. I know a lot about how to comport oneself in a business setting, which I honestly think is like definitely a hard skill to learn, and something that people don't like mention as much, but is really a skill, and something that like takes time to hone. It took me 4 years to feel like I was at a place where my professionalism and my presence was something that I could really sell, that was a skill that was strong enough that I could shine it in interviews, or shine a light on it in interviews. And so, yeah, that's kind of like how I ended up deciding to change careers yet again, because I started out in psychology, and then I moved to like engineering, and then I moved to like the business side, and then I kind of came full circle all the way back to social work.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that's so good to hear that you were able to explore like engineering, building some skills there, going into a more business focused role, and then building some more skills, probably like meeting different people. Probably nice to have some more financial stability too before you
That's for
go
sure.
back into social work. And that's amazing. It sounds really, really tough to be working a full-time job and then on the side doing all these passion projects. Like, I can only imagine how tiring it is. Then finally going back to social work. So kind of pivoting to kind of your school experience now, like how was your grad school application process?
The application process is actually very unstandardized for at least for social work masters. I think for most graduate programs, they're pretty unstandardized, because it's less so about like everybody needs to go to grad school, and more so that this grad school is trying to sell themselves to get you to pay money to them to make it worth your while. And so it's like one should only go to grad school, I believe, if they feel that their career necessitates it. Either they want to change careers, or they've hit like a wall in their career that they're not able to like get to the next level. And so because of that, it's in a sense like you are interviewing them and they're interviewing you, versus when I feel like when you apply to undergrad, it seems very much so one way, and it's really just about like, what can you bring to the school, right?
Yeah.
So with grad school, it's a little bit different. And I liked that, because I could really appeal to that in my essays of like, these are the specific things that your school offers, and this is why it matches well with my past experience, and this is what I'm hoping to gain out of your program. And having that like dialogue, and also like having the application process be it's much more individualized, because I think there's just less applicants in general. And so there's more essays, there's more like kind of like side components that you need to like add to them. But I think it shows a much more well-rounded like sign of who I am and, you know, what I'm able to offer to the program, and what I'm able to get out of the program.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up applying to 3 schools, and specifically because, like I said, it's just as much about what I want as what they want. And so I was looking for specifically programs that, you know, are in my budget, that meet the that suit my past experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I specifically was looking for an online program or a local program because I love the Bay Area. I love my Vietnamese community, and I wasn't interested in leaving it. And so to tick all of those boxes, I ended up applying to 3 different schools. I got into all of them, and
Congrats.
thank you. And I decided to go with Columbia because I like that they have a social enterprise administration track in their social work program. And so now I'm able to like learn how to work on like the business leadership, entrepreneurial side of social work and social impact, and build connections in that space. And I feel like it really, you know, jives well with my prior experience. And yeah, it just definitely was like the right fit for me.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. That sounds great. You finished the applications, you got into the schools, you picked the one that felt like was the best fit for you. Speaking of your experiences at Columbia, like what's been kind of the most impactful learning or takeaways that you've had so far while in the program?
The biggest takeaway for me was an eye-opener of how private-public partnerships work. I think I got to see behind the curtain of like, you know, when we think about nonprofits, what is
Mm-hmm.
that? What does it really mean to be a nonprofit? And how can a nonprofit retain their mission while listening to a board that might have certain incentives that are really, you know, based in the private sector?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, even though nonprofits aren't, you know, trying to maybe like build up their revenue, they might be looking for longevity, they might be looking for other things, which necessitates them making partnerships with corporations, and those corporations might want different things. And so seeing those aspects of social work, like leadership and like just business strategy, is a huge learning for me, because it's actually more tied to corporate life than I had previously ever expected.
Yeah. And for people who don't know as much about nonprofits, like usually the nonprofit employees are employees of the nonprofit, and they're somewhat controlled or advised by a board of directors who are oftentimes people who have high level connections. So like people who are like VPs at companies, presidents at private companies, a lot of different um, organizations that are usually not nonprofit related, and they can help bring in fundraisers, or they can help, you know, do events with their companies, or they sponsor the nonprofit in various ways. So usually the board of directors has that kind of tie for maybe people who are listening who aren't as familiar. But that's very insightful. Like I'm not super familiar with the whole process. So it's good to hear that you've learned a lot, and you're able to tie in some of the things that you learned through your corporate career with a lot of the stuff that you're learning now through grad school, and finishing your program. So in terms of kind of where do you see yourself next after you graduate?
It's a great question. It honestly changes from day to day these days. A part of me does imagine taking these experiences and going back into the private world, and like thinking about that volunteer work that I was doing on job training and on like community development intertwined with corporate development. Those things still are interesting to me, and I feel like I could do them so much better now with the knowledge that I have gained. So it's one
Mm-hmm.
path. I think another path for me is more entrepreneurial, and I'm very interested in maybe starting my own consulting firm where I'm working with nonprofits on how to digitalize, how to bring tech into their work, how to also think about like I guess like organizational and industrial psychology, and how can we bring those into very traditional nonprofits that often don't, aren't maybe as nimble as tech orgs. So I think that there's definitely some magic that can happen there, which I'm interested to explore. So I don't know where I'm going to be next, but I do know that somewhere between, private and public is calling my name.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll maybe see me there.
Wow, I'm really looking forward to seeing, what you do next. Like it's such an awesome and amazing journey that you've had, and hopefully people find it helpful and inspired to hear like you can follow your dreams, and that, gosh, just working hard, being in the right place at the right time, and just applying. Like that's amazing to hear. You just applied to Google and then it just all worked out, because a lot of people, it's very hard for a lot of people, especially people of color, women, minorities, to break into a lot of these large companies, because a lot of people get those jobs through referrals. So if you're not knowing like the right people, or you're not in kind of the right circles, it can be very difficult to actually increase diversity at a lot of these companies. And then also for them to retain diverse talent, because there's so few diverse people there, so few minorities, that a lot of the people who do arrive, they don't feel comfortable, and they don't feel like maybe the corporate workplace is as friendly as it can be for them. And like maybe some of these programs, they claim to really support diversity, but they don't actually pay the diverse employees anything additional for all the extra work they're putting in, which I think
Totally.
is a big issue. And yeah, I'm really excited to see what you're going to do to shake up the space, add in like another voice, and really what's going to be next for you. So I look forward to it. Thanks again for being on the show today, and I really appreciate it. So I appreciate your time. Hopefully people will find value in your personal story. So thanks again, everybody, for watching. If you found this video helpful, hit the like button, drop any comments if you have any questions, share the video, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos. Thanks again, Laura, for your time today.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
All right. Deep breath in, deep breath out. Have a good rest of your day, everyone. Take care.